Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today I'm honored to have Cara Daugherty with me. Cara is the owner of Cara Renee Media, and one of the things I think you're going to hear in her journey is when you find a passion, sometimes it's something you had to teach yourself, but if you really buy into it, it can take you to new levels. So Cara, thanks so much for being on today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so growing up, you started to enjoy sports. So talk a little bit about playing sports at an early age and really what you enjoyed about
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very tall, especially for a girl. I'm 6'2". My whole entire family is tall. So it was never, expected to play, but also kind of encouraged. So growing up, I played volleyball and basketball, and it's not like it was now where you don't start when you're 3 years old back then. You started kind of, elementary school and then middle school, you start getting a little more serious about it. So always enjoyed it, just having that, camaraderie, the teammate, just loved the game. And then freshman year in high school, I actually had shoulder surgery from playing volleyball. So missed most of volleyball season, missed all of basketball season. Sophomore year came back strong. And then junior year, I was like, I kind of want to focus on basketball. So stopped playing volleyball and basketball was the main focus. Come senior year, before a season started, I'm at a showcase in Columbus, Ohio, and blew my knee out. This is like October of 2009. And I'm like, it's fine. I'll just go get a brace and jump back and try to play a couple games for my senior year. Ended up having surgery twice during my senior year. And that was rough because, being tall, as a female is kind of expected, like, oh, I'm going to play in college. That was just kind of the path that was laid out for me. And I hadn't had any, official visits or signed anywhere. I'm kind of waiting, senior year, kind of break out, get a little more comfortable with it. And so that whole year I was like, well, shoot, what am I going to do now? And I did have some film up. So I had some schools like Ohio State reach out to me to row for them. And I'm like, rowing? What? I don't want to do that. And then ended up having a couple smaller D3 schools reach out to me and say, hey, do you want to come play basketball next year? And I'm like, have you seen my knee? And they're like, yeah, we don't care. I'm like, okay, we'll give it a shot. So ended up going to small D3 school in Ohio called Wilmington College my freshman year. And what do you know, a month or so into preseason, blow my knee out again. I'm like, what am I going to do? So that kind of continued off and on for 6-7 years. I ended up having 8 knee surgeries. So a lot of, where it's like you think you have one thing lined up and then you're young, you're 17 years old still. And then you kind of still hold on that dream for a while. And then you get to a point and you realize one day it's just not worth it anymore. So kind of had to pivot. And that wasn't until really probably 14, 15 that I realized, hey, this is not how my life's going to be. I'm done playing in college and we'll have to look what's next.
Yeah. Now, as you kind of share that, I think, those ages, it's really hard to have injuries because a lot of who we are is defined by maybe the attention we're getting, and a lot of the attention we're getting is by the success we're having, from playing volleyball, from playing basketball. But talk a little bit about that for you, just, the emotional side of going through those injuries. And like you said, 8 of them. It's not like it was one, going through 8 of them and just kind of persevering and continuing on.
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, I went through some really dark days. I didn't realize it in the moment, which it should have been obvious, but I was really depressed. I actually ran away to Texas when I was 18 years old, 19 years old, thinking that, I don't know, something would change down there, not being in Ohio. And yeah, and it was kind of getting that glimmer of hope over and over again, where it's like, I have surgery, I rehab, I get cleared to play. I actually moved up to North Carolina. I was playing volleyball and basketball in college down there for a little bit. And just kind of like getting heartbroken over and over again and trying to figure out like when you should quit because it's not worth it anymore, or like the balance between that, but thinking, hey, if I work harder and try harder, I can make it work. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Where it's like you don't want to give up because you feel like you're giving up, but then realizing, hey, this is not how my life is supposed to be played out.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really valid point. It's such there's a very deciding factor there because I think sometimes people do give up too early, right? They get that
Mm-hmm.
first, taste of difficulty or, defeat, and all of a sudden they're like, all right, it's not for me. And it's like, well, no, you need to persevere a little bit. And then there is the other side where you go, I really feel like I've given everything I can, and now it's just time to move on.
Exactly. Yep. Nailed it. And it's like a lot of people don't win because they quit when it gets hard. So I was kind of balancing that in my head, where I'm like, hey, am I just not trying hard enough or not waiting long enough? Is it eventually going to work out? And then I had one doctor and he was talking about, your body kind of having miles. And he's like, you're using up all your miles right now and they're not going very well. And he kind of put some perspective. He's like, do you want to have kids someday? And I said, yeah, absolutely. He's like, do you want to be able to get on the floor and play with them and get up and run around? I was like, yeah, of course. And he's like, if you keep on going at the speed that you are right now, you're never going to make it there. You're going to be in chronic pain. And that just kind of hit me hard. And that was one of those deciding factors where I was like, wow, it's more than just basketball. It's my entire life.
Yes. That that is good perspective. Now, as you're going through college, I would imagine part of the injuries led you to wanting to do the medical route of like nursing and physical therapy, just saying, hey, well, I've had some experience with this. Maybe I can, help others if they have any of those events. So talk a bit about picking that, but then talk about getting into more of the social media marketing role.
Yeah, so kind of the premise of your whole entire podcast here, where it's like, you think you have one thing figured out. And so going through my senior year in high school, I actually shadowed at a couple of physical therapy places. I was already going there and wanted to learn more about that. And then freshman year, I decided to be an athletic training major and then realized what horrible hours those are. And kind of same thing, if you do want to, have a family someday, you're working nights and weekends. And at the time, I was like, don't really want to go that path. And so I just kind of went nursing to make it vague and still, be in the medical field and help people and all of that. So I get through my first couple years, things are going well, and one of my best friends was like, hey, you should get your real estate license. She was in real estate, and I'm like, nah, like, why would I want to do that? She's like, trust me, you have to. And I fought it. And eventually she pretty much made me. She was a very like forceful friend, and best way, like the most loving way possible. And so she worked for a custom home builder. So it wasn't your traditional real estate. It was more of the like design, architectural, that kind of stuff. So I got my real estate license. This was 2016. So gosh, almost 10 years ago already. And ended up working for a company. It was a small company and I loved it. Turns out I was really good at it. Helped me kind of get out of my shell a little bit, working in sales. And continued to do that both in North Carolina and then in Indianapolis for about 6 years. So quite some time doing that.
Yeah.
And
Now, well, I was just going to ask, so on the real estate side or the sales side, I think that is something where there are certain people that say, oh, I'm good at this, or oh, I'm bad at this. And then there's kind of the in between where, if you're given the opportunity, you might develop some skills that you either didn't know you had, or just really strengthening those skills to make you, good at what you're thinking about. So talk a little about getting out of your comfort zone and learning those skills, or just, getting them stronger so that you can be skilled and talented there.
yeah, to your point, it's definitely a ladder where I was like, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not pushy. I don't like talking to a bunch of people. And when you're in that position, you just kind of are forced to get better and, forced to do it. So looking back from like that point to even where I am now, I'm like, there are so many of those skills that I learned that helped me in my current career that I didn't know that I would need back then. And I think a big part of it is just being able to communicate. I mean, I'm 32 and I feel like a lot of the younger generation is almost a lost art, not to their fault, but everything's done through the phone. And so when somebody walked in and wanted to build a custom home, especially, in Indianapolis, we're talking, $1 million+ a lot of the times, you have to be able to talk to every single person to make them feel calm, and you have to be trusting. They have to like you, and kind of understanding their type of communication style too. So learning more about, like the DISC personality or Enneagrams or whatever, way you want to describe it, learning how to communicate with other people in ways that you aren't really used to.
That's so good. Now, and I think another element of it, and you mentioned, sometimes I think the thought behind sales is that, oh, yeah, I need to be pushing something, right? And I think a realization in a lot of different types of sales is that it's so relationship based, right? There's a lot more, how do I connect with someone rather than, hey, how do I get them to quickly decide to do something? So talk a little bit about that for you, especially if you're in the custom home building side, that I'm sure relationships is about as paramount as it can be.
Yeah, you quickly realize it's just solving problems. That's all it is. And being in that situation where we could do pretty much anything really helped. And so a big part of it is when you're getting to know them is figuring out why now. Say they're like, oh, we need to move because of this. There's usually a deeper reason, whether it's, they, are growing a family or had, a mother who's not doing well and has to move in with them or whatever it is, and kind of finding the real reason and bringing it back to that, So you are in sales, so you are using some tactics where you say, hey, if you stay here, if you stay in your current situation, you're going to have to deal with X, Y, and Z and kind of, twist the knife, So we did use that kind of stuff sometimes, but it was all in their best interest, and kind of figuring out what their needs were. And I think a lot of what I did then was realizing that everything is figure outable. And I use that phrase all the time now, where I'm like, if I have, a client in my current career who wants to work with this brand or wants to get in touch with this person, I'm like, you can do anything you want to do. Like, I mean, everything is figure outable. And with the internet and YouTube and TikTok and all these resources, there's really no reason why you can't do what you want to do.
I love it. Now, as you mentioned, clearly today we're not in real estate. So, as you had done it for a period of time, it just became a realization that, hey, it's not what I want to do for forever. So, talk a little bit about that. Even when you're having success in something, realizing that maybe it's not the thing that gives you the most fulfillment or the most joy, and being willing to take a bold step into something else.
Yeah, absolutely. It was one of those things where I grew to be very good at it, and I did enjoy the work I did. It was fantastic money, but the stress was getting to me to the point where I was not sleeping, I was not eating, I was having a lot of health issues. All of my friends and family were like, "What is going on? This is not you." And in that industry, you used to a lot of like highs and lows, like stress wise, kind of busy season and this and that. But this was kind of like the height of COVID, a little bit afterwards, and so the supply chain issue was horrible. I was getting yelled at every single day by clients over things that were beyond my control. And it's got to a point where I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And so that was May of 2022, so 2.5 years ago already. And I have never regretted not being in that industry anymore. I mean, it served its part. I'm very thankful for it in a lot of ways. But it got to
Yeah.
a point and I'm like, it's not worth it. And so in real estate, you get paid half in new home sales. You get paid half when the home digs and then half when they close. And so I had a lot of commissions built up. And so I just took some time off and I was like, we're just going to get back to, eating well and working out and just, kind of figure out what I want to do. So come like a year and a half ago, I was like, all right, we should probably start figuring out what you want to do, Cara. And obviously I still love basketball. So kind of backstory a little bit. I moved to Indianapolis in 2019, was still having a lot of chronic knee pain, had another knee surgery. Long story short, I found this physical therapist in this gym in Indianapolis, iFast. They were absolutely incredible because at this point I was still having chronic pain where it hurt to walk. I would not want to get groceries. I was, 26, 27 years old and just in pain all the time. And found iFast. They changed my life within, about 2 months pain free. About 4 or 5 months, I'm playing basketball again. So that's a whole other podcast episode. But with that, my perception of everything changed where I'm like, okay, physically I can do whatever I want now, but even more than that, I'm like the things that you think are never going to change, there's no solution, there's always a way that can happen. So for a long time I resented the game of basketball. I had dreams about it still. All I want to do is play still. And with my knee, getting better, I grew to love the game again. So I actually ended up coaching high school girls basketball last year. So now whether I'm taking photos or coaching or playing or just watching, I just love being around the game. And so thinking about that a year and a half ago, and I'm like, what am I going to do with my life? I'm like, okay, I love basketball. I've always done a lot of like social media marketing on the side since, probably 2012 on my own, brand partnerships, all of that. And I love helping people, kind of going back to like that nursing, degree that I was pursuing, kind of all those things kind of pulled together. And so I just decided to start my own business and help athletes kind of share their story and work on their social media brand.
Yeah. So I'm going to rewind to a couple of things and then we'll come back to
Yeah,
that
that was a
moment.
lot.
But so one of the things you mentioned was it was, sports or basketball was something you almost resented. And then you were able to get yourself to a spot where you actually were back in enjoyment and passion. And someone listening right now may not be thinking that about basketball, but there may be something in their life that they have resentment towards, and they just haven't taken a step to work through that and open up the door to the good that can come from it. So, maybe help someone listening who has that same feeling, they just haven't crossed the bridge yet to get back to a spot where they actually enjoy the thing.
Yeah, so I think of whether it's like a career or a hobby that we're trying to pursue in our adult lives, a lot of it comes down to the things that you enjoyed as a child, right? So whether it's like for me playing basketball or even like taking photos now, I'm like I love that like creative side of it when I was younger, and you're kind of coming back to it. And so I feel like there's so much pressure, whether it's like a career or hobby wise, to make it into something bigger than it is. And you kind of figure out when I was younger, what are the things that I enjoy before like life got in the way, before you were stressed out, before you had kids, before you had, family problems, before your job was killing you, whatever it was, and kind of finding that spot where it's just peace. So it's like for me, being on the basketball court and putting some headphones in and getting some shots up, when I was going through my stressful, old job, that was the only time when I was not worried about anything else. I was just happy. It was just me. I was very in the moment. So kind of going back to a place where it's like, what did I enjoy before all of life stresses got to me?
I love it. Now, a second thing you mentioned moving around Texas, North Carolina, Indianapolis. So I think, moving can be exciting for certain people, right? It's a fresh start, it's new connections, it is what it is. It can also be daunting to other people, right? Like, I got to put myself outside of my comfort zone. I'm going to have to go meet people. Whatever it is, I have to reinvent myself, however you look at it. So, talk a little bit about for you just your experience in moving and being in different spots, and then really just being able to connect and grow with people.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Ohio. Very, very small town, no stoplight, no gas station, very small. And I always knew I wanted to get away. My dad was really great at taking us on road trips, family vacations in the summer, and we had visited quite a few states. And everywhere we went, I'm like, I can live here, whether it was, California or Kennebunkport, Maine. And so after, my first freshman year of college with my knee blowing out, I was like, all right, maybe I can go to Australia. And I applied to college in Sydney, Australia, and I got in. My parents were like, absolutely not. So I was like, okay,
That's
what's
too
next
far.
best? I'm like, North Carolina, like the beach. And they were like, okay, we'll allow that. So I just looked at the map. I was Wilmington, North Carolina is where I ended up moving. And I struggle with this because for me, it was so easy. There was never a doubt in my mind where I'm like, hey, we're just going to figure this out. And so I moved down there, ended up being there for 7 years. Loved it. Beautiful place to live, but wanted to be closer to family. So went to Indianapolis, like 2 hours from my hometown. Same thing there. I didn't know a single person there. I didn't have anything, but in North Carolina, I quit my job. I sold my house. I'm like, we're just going to move there. And now I'm splitting time between New York and Cincinnati and Indy. And this probably isn't very helpful, but I think it's something that you just kind of have in you or you don't. Where like for
Yeah.
me, it never was scary. I never second guessed it. It was always simple and kind of with my sister, same thing. She's bounced around a lot too. But I know for a lot of people, especially like from the Midwest, they're like, this is home, this is easy. And I always try to push them to get out for a little bit because I'm like, you can always come home. If you try somewhere and don't like it, like home is always going to be there. But I feel like you're going to regret not trying somewhere new. So even if it's like going to college, I know it's easy. You have in-state tuition and this and that. But it's like, if you're from Ohio, why not go to school in North Carolina for a few years or in Georgia or Florida or wherever it is and kind of see the world and just be around different people instead of just being, home the entire time. And again, you can move back home after college, but just get out and see the world a little bit.
Absolutely. Now, you also mentioned that in your time off, you just really wanted to focus on you, right? And so that was, health. It was maybe reigniting some of those passions that you had. And I think so often, we start to mask over those things, right? We give well, I don't have time to get a workout in, right? I'm too busy with, kids' activities or my work or whatever it is. And then all of a sudden, you wake up 5 years down the road and you're like, oh crap. Like, I'm not in the spot I want to be in. So talk about that little season for you of just like kind of re-engaging with Cara and, finding out where you're at.
Yeah, so I am a big podcast person. I don't listen to a lot of them. My favorite is Ed Milet. I found him probably in 2019, and not to be dramatic, but he has changed my life in so many ways. I listened to this morning. I mean, every single time he has a new one come out, I'm like, we're putting this on because it helps get me in the mindset. And it's like there's a lot of podcasts that are just kind of like cheesy, motivational. Oh, you should do this, but I feel like he's really good at giving like tangible advice and really kind of hits you hard sometimes where you're like, oh crap, like that's me right now. And so
Yeah.
for me at that point, I was like, at this point, I was 20, 29 years old. And it's never where you see yourself at, almost 30 years old, like, okay, I don't really have a career right now. I'm single. I don't know where I want to live, all these things. And at first I was kind of discouraged by that, but then I twisted it and I was like, this is the opportunity to do anything you want to do. Like you can recreate yourself. You don't have to live with who you were a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I had no direction. Anybody you talk to that knows me, like the biggest part was like, I don't know where I want to live, like geographically. And my faith is really important to me. And I was like, God's just going to reveal it. I'm like, I don't know if it's going to be today or a year from now, but where I'm supposed to be, it's going to be so obvious that there's going to be no reason for me to be like, oh, I'm not sure if this is what it is. And so I moved back to my hometown
Yeah.
for a year, to our small little hometown that if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I would have swore up and down I would never be there ever again. But ended up being able to spend time with family and, like I said, coach high school girls basketball, which was so much fun. And just kind of like take my time and again realize like you can recreate yourself. Like I feel like our parents' generations, it's like you have one career, you've got one job your entire life. And now it's like you can bounce around. Like it's not a bad thing. Like I said, I went from, medical and nursing to real estate and now working in sports. And you can decide what path is yours. It's like you're never too late and you're never too old. I mean, I don't care if you're 45 years old. If you're not happy where you are, it doesn't matter. You can reinvent yourself.
Yes, I love that. Now, to the reinventing part of yourself, you mentioned, so I had been doing some brand deals, but really, it was kind of on the side thing, and you decided to take the leap and start your own business. And, as you're looking at that, cameras, being behind the camera, getting the right angle, the right lighting, capturing the moment. There's a whole science behind this, and if I understand correctly, this was not something that was your forte at that moment in time, but you practiced. So talk a little bit about, getting behind the camera and really learning, all of those aspects to be able to make that a career.
Yeah. So Ed Milet always says that you are the most qualified to help the person you used to be. And, and that just resonates with me so much. And so for me, going through all my knee surgeries and all that with my identity being a basketball player and then having that taken away from me, I'm like, that happens so often, whether you're at the college level, the professional level, male, female, whatever it is. And so I really wanted to help people create their brand online. That way they could help tell their story and inspire others. And when they were done playing, that they had something else they could fall on if they didn't know what to do right away. I mean, your basketball, your sports career is finite. It could be over tomorrow. It could be over in 10 years. And so that was the main goal of what I wanted to do. And I had a client, my first client, who played in the NBA G League for the Pacers. And so I went to his game and I'm like, I should probably start like taking photos or something. I don't know. And so my dad had a really old Canon camera, and I was like, Dad, do you care if I use this? He's like, No, not at all. And so I literally went on TikTok and I just watched hundreds of videos on how to shoot photos, and I was in yearbook in high school, but it was just those tiny little digital cameras. It wasn't, actual manual mode photography. And so I picked up a camera just a little bit over a year ago, and I had media credentials to shoot all the Pacers G League teams, like where the Pacers play. So, which was a phenomenal opportunity, right? So I don't, discount that at all. But yeah, I just got out and I shot every chance I had, whether it was basketball or I shot a high school prom this past year or senior pictures or family photos or whatever sport it was. Because the more you practice, like the better you are, the more confident you get. So like all these new photographers, which I consider myself new still, it's only been a year of shooting, they are always asking for advice, and I'm like, just get out there and shoot, just put in the reps, whether it's basketball on the court or photography or your fitness journey or whatever it is. The best way to get better, like, yeah, you can sit around and watch YouTube videos for hours and hours, and that's important to a certain degree, but you just got to go out
Yeah.
there and do it. And you might not feel like you're ready or qualified yet, but you just got to start.
So, and I think that's so wise to say that because I mean, the most frequent thing is, oh, I've thought about doing that, or oh, I wish I would have done that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The only difference between you and somebody else at this point is that you started it, right? Because you could rewind the clock a year and a half, and you could be in the same spot of, oh, I wish I could be the one, taking a photo of an NBA game or an MLS game that you've been able to do. But the difference was you were willing to take that step, and I think so frequently we fear being not good at something, and the realization is, well, when you first start almost anything, you're not going to be great at it. It takes practice. So talk a bit about that and just being willing to take the step. And once again, I love that you mentioned everything's figure outable, but being willing to take the brave step to get started.
Yeah, I look back at photos I took a year ago that I have posted on social media, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like who let me do that? Who gave me credentials to shoot, Division 1 men's college basketball games? And so something I've struggled with recently and quickly got over was that a lot of these opportunities I've had, you kind of mentioned, and not to brag right now, but I've been shooting for a year and I've shot NBA, NFL, MLS, a lot of great opportunities. And some of them, I'm like, am I really qualified to be here? And to be honest, like, no, like I wasn't a lot of the times, but I also earned it. because I knew the right people. I always showed up. I mean, I don't care how far I was driving. I mean, I've been everywhere across the country the past year, doing things for free. And so, kind of the conversation between, do I deserve this or am I qualified for this? A lot of times the answer can be no, but like you said, like the fact that you just show up and start, like most people think they have to have it all figured out and have everything in plan. And my motto a lot of time is jump and figure it out on the way down. There's some things that people are like, hey, like, can you help me do this? Or can you shoot this? And I'm like, yeah, for sure. And then I go back and I'm like, oh crap, how am I going to do this? And you got to study and you got to learn. But also being in that position, it forces you to do it. It's like, if you don't have those commitments or those opportunities, you might think, oh, eventually I really want to learn how to shoot weddings or whatever it is, even though I don't want to do that. But if you're forced to, to do something, you're like, hey, I actually have to figure this out right now, not just say, oh, well, one day I'll get to it.
I love that. Well, and something else, not everyone listening is a business owner, but I think what you said is profound. Sometimes in running your own business, you're doing things that maybe don't make financial sense, especially in the beginning. But hey, it might cultivate a relationship. It might, help me get better experience or additional experience that I didn't already have. So I'll say yes to it, even though, yeah, if I did the math here, it's not going to make sense financially, but I know there could be good things that come from it. So talk about that side of, more of the business piece of it for you and being willing to say yes to certain things today to get the experience and opportunities and relationships. And then, hey, down the road, knowing it will come full circle. It's just a matter of when.
Yeah. So in the beginning, I did a lot of photography work for free because I was like, I'm not good enough to charge. And that probably is true at the time. But I also very quickly realized that photos are a great way to make connection because whether you're an athlete or whoever you are, people love photos of themselves, right? Like professional, nice photos. And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with the NBA G League. It's kind of
Yeah.
like the minor league for the NBA. And so for people who aren't familiar, basically each team in the NBA has a G League team, and there are three players on each team that are considered two-way players. So they kind of go up and down from the main NBA team to the G League team. And having access to the G League, I was like, I have to take advantage of this. So I would shoot my client, of course. I'm going to give out all my secrets right now. So I would shoot other players too, and I would post it on my Instagram story. I would ghost tag them, so just like sliding the tag off the page. And almost every single time, they would repost it, they would follow me, they DM me, hey, do you have any more photos? I say, yeah, absolutely. And I end up, getting their number and send them the photos of themselves for free. I did that for hundreds of players last year. But statistically, 50% of players in the G League make it to the NBA. And so I was doing this all last year. I mean, not just Indianapolis, but I was driving to Chicago, Cleveland. I went to Sioux Falls, South Dakota a few weeks ago to shoot a few G League games. And I mean, all over the place, right? Again, for free. So I'm paying for, gas, flights, hotels, whatever it was, and not getting anything in return. But I know that it was going to come full circle building those relationships. And here we are, less than a year later, and I have clients that play in the NBA because I met them, 6, 8 months ago, a year ago, while they were playing the G League.
I love it. Well, and so something with that, and you can speak to this. I won't put words in your mouth. I'll let you speak to it. But it is, you know, when you help people get what they want, inevitably it helps you get what you want in return, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that in such a way where it's not like I had the intention of getting what I wanted, right? My goal was to truly just help someone else out. However, I also know that there's a reciprocity that happens, right? If I help
Sure.
you, then an element of you that wants to also help me. And so, to your point, hey, I was taking these photos of all these people, and there's some that probably it didn't go anywhere, right? You shot them photos, and all right, whatever, move on to the next
Yep,
person.
didn't even
But
tag you when they posted it. Like, yep.
but then there's other people that were like, oh wow, how neat! Like I didn't ask you to do this. I probably today have no way of actually helping you out, but you did something nice for me, and then all of a sudden the opportunity comes, and they say, oh yeah, Cara, I can go to her. She can be my person. So talk a little bit about that willingness to do it, even though at that moment in time there may not have been the opportunity, but good favor moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say two things to that. And I say the same thing a lot. I kind of word it a little bit differently. with photography, I love it, but I never want it to be like my main thing. I always want it to be a hobby, and I use it to add value, right? Well, I use it to get indoors because it really has opened a lot of doors, but I also add value. And so, like with clients, whether it's shooting on the court or if they have a brand deal with a clothing company or they have an event opening up, I love that I don't have to outsource that I can just go and shoot that because I have the knowledge now where I'm like, oh yeah, I can document this or this or this. And so the
Yeah.
whole adding value part, is really important to me. But then the other part that I say all the time is you have to show up. Like
Mm.
all of these young photographers or entrepreneurs are like, oh, well, how did you accomplish so much in 1 year? I'm like, because I showed up. And everyone's like, Cara, aren't you tired? And I say no, because when you find something that is aligned with what you're supposed to be doing, you don't get tired like that. I mean, last year I was living 2 hours from Indianapolis. I was coaching high school girls basketball. And so there were many times where I would, go to our practice. I would drive 2 hours, shoot a game in Indy, edit there, drive 2 hours back. I'm not getting home till 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm doing that multiple times a week. I'm all over the place. And one, like you have to just, get those reps in. But two, people start seeing you and recognizing you, right? Like, especially in sports, it is such a boys' world. Like, we're not going to get into that, but like, whether it's sports in general or the media, like, I was in the Nets media room last week and I'm looking around. There's probably 30 people in there and I'm the only girl. And
Wow.
it's tough to like push in there as a female. Again, that's a whole nother conversation. But when you start showing up and showing up, so like the Pacers G League team, I know all their coaches. I know all the guys that play for them, this year, last year. I know the management. And so if you're showing up and adding value over and over to them, you never know when it can help out. So, like, for example, I'm up in New York now. I want to shoot for the Knicks G League team. One of my good friends now that I knew from the Pacers G League team, Steve, is a coach for the Knicks G League team. I was like, hey, can you connect me with your PR person up there? Done, no problem. Going to shoot the games up there. And so you realize that it's a very small industry. Everyone knows everyone. And so if you're a good person, and again, you add value, people are not going to, bat an eye if you want a connection to somebody or need help with something.
I love it. Now, on top of the NBA, as you mentioned, you also did some NFL and MLS things. So, talk a little about those two opportunities as well and kind of how they came to be.
Yeah, so the summer I was living in Cincinnati, still kind of living there. It's a long story. And I have a friend who has a nonprofit and does a lot of that kind of work. And so he started calling me saying, hey, can you come shoot this? Can you come shoot this? And again, not paid a penny for it, and that's totally fine. But I got introduced to a lot of NFL players that are doing, community service work or doing things, kids event, that kind of stuff. And I was sitting at a Cincinnati Reds game, I don't know, maybe September, sweating my butt off, drenched in sweat. I get a DM from an NFL agent, and he says, hey, can you come shoot this thing for my client tonight? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So I'm driving an hour home, showering, changing, coming back and stuff. And I did get paid for that one. But just, making connections that way. And then got to know a lot of them. And kind of the same thing where it's like, back to the whole point of this is like, you are an athlete, but like there are so many resources like ESPN and Bleacher Report who are sharing your story as an athlete. There's never been an opportunity to get more connected with your audience right now. Like they don't want to know all the fluffy stuff. They want to know like what's your go-to pregame meal? How do you spend an off day? What are your hobbies? Like they want to know that on a deeper level. And I know it's kind of a long game too. So for an athlete to open up on social media, they have to trust you again, right? So I'm not just going to go and meet somebody and say, hey, I think that you should do this, this, and this. I'm going to continue to build that and show up, So it's like I might shoot an event for somebody or shoot a game for somebody, and then I'm not going to pitch myself right away, If I mean I have before, and if it works out, then it works out. But it's like they're not going to do anything unless they trust you. So it's like more of that like long term game too.
I love it. Now, earlier you had mentioned a little something about, hey, so many people want to have these things, but they're not willing to put in the work or the effort to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And listened to a podcast and they said, oftentimes people look at life like they're watching a golf event or like they're watching the Boston Marathon where they show the beginning part and then they show the end part of, the person sprinting across the finish line. And they forget that there was 5.5 hours of that person's mental dialogue going on. And you didn't have to really watch that, right? Or on the golfing channel, right? You see him tee off, and then you see him, sick, hit the sick putt, but you didn't see all of the other parts of their golf round. And I think in business, it's very similar, right? Someone looks at you and goes, "Well, gosh, I wish I was shooting an NBA player. I wish I was able to shoot an NFL player."
Yep.
And you go, well, you wish you got
If you
that,
had
but
any
you wish that
idea.
you were driving, yeah, 4 hours to, this city unpaid on your own dollar, just at the opportunity to shoot, take photos, but not knowing where it's going to go. Probably not, right? And then multiply that by I did it 50 times last year, whatever it is.
Mhm.
And you say, all right, do I really want that? So talk a bit about the in between, right? The getting started, the we'll call it mountaintop side of things, and then all the in betweens there.
Yeah, that's so good, Phil. And like you said, that's the part where no one wants to go through that, right? It's like they see me, oh, you started this a year ago, started shooting a year ago, and you got to do all these cool things. And I'm like, yes, but, and that's where I think social media comes, to be very important too, where we all know it's a highlight reel. I guess my highlight reel too, I'm not going to lie, but I try to be more transparent about my struggles too. I also work at a lot of music festivals, which has been so much fun. So doing socials, photos, all of that, a lot of awesome people I've met through that. But what I try to show is that there's a lot of rejection in this, and there was one episode with Ed that I learned a lot about rejection. But in the sports industry or in the business industry, you have to learn to deal with rejection well, because for all these cool things that I've done, for every one cool thing that I've done, there's been 50 no's. And I'm not being dramatic when I say that. So last fall, I actually had interviews with both the Indiana Pacers and the Atlanta Hawks to work in social media. And interviews both went great. They were all on Zoom. And they both ended up coming back and saying, hey, we think you'd be a good fit, but we're going with somebody who has NBA experience, which I knew could very well happen. And maybe like a day or so that kind of hurt. And then I was like, you know what? It's their loss, because I'm so confident I could be better than, sorry if anybody's listening to this, I could do a better job than anybody they're going to hire. Like, I was just so confident in my skills in that. But it's like, there are a lot of things that are not going to work out in your favor, and you don't know why at the time. And so you just got to keep on pushing. Like, you don't know if, like Ed always says, you don't know which yes is going to be the yes, but if you keep on going, you're going to figure it out. And so I feel like the in between is a lot of rejection. And for me, there was no plan B. I'm like, we're just going to make this work. And I feel like if you aren't so confident and set in whatever you're doing is going to work out, you're going to get discouraged in between. But when you have that mindset that there's no other option, like you're going to figure it out, that makes it so much easier to go through all the rejection.
Yes, I love it. Well, and then the other thing I just want to highlight in, your story thus far is, sometimes you have this specific route you want to go, right? Like your route is professional athletes and on the festival side, like that, music festivals. Those are kind of your two bread and butter things at this point. And at the same token, when you're getting a business started, sometimes you have to do other things, right? You say, yeah, hey, maybe shooting prom wasn't. I don't know that I desire to, be a prom photographer for the rest of my life, but hey, it helps me,
It
have
pays the
money. So
bills. Yeah.
yeah, it helps me have money so I can go do these trips for free to get into doors. And I think so frequently, whether it's joining a mastermind, getting coaching, paying for something, people look at it as this expense, and they're like, ugh, if I spend money there, then I can't spend it on this, or then I don't have money for that. And you go, well, if you're really trying to grow and develop and get the best that you can, sometimes it does require an investment of money or time, right? So talk a bit about that, especially in the business startup phase of taking on things, even if it's not necessarily your, target environment, but doing it because it's important and critical to the, having a runway to be able to run the business.
Yeah, it's all just a resource, right? Money is a resource. And so I think it helped, again, kind of going back to things I've done in my past have helped me to get where I am now, is that in real estate, I was working off commission, right? So it's like, hey, do you want to make money? You're going to work. And so I've always kind of had that mindset. And so, the past year, when I was first starting out last year shooting, I was like, okay, to your point, I never want to shoot a prom ever again, and I'm never going to. Like, I will never do it ever again. But that was great money then, and it was experience too. I guess I work with flash photography and just get a little more exposure there. No pun intended. But there are a lot of things that you're not going to want to do. But I feel like when you're an entrepreneur and working off commission, you can figure it out. Again, not to harp on that figure outable again, but it's like, okay, I want to go, book this trip to go do this, whether it's, going to NBA All-Star weekend or whatever it is, you kind of figure out months in advance, okay, well, I can pick up this project to kind of cover this. And you're just kind of doing what you can right now. And I feel like a lot of people want to skip over the struggle phase, and that kind of goes into talking about, friends and family being supportive or unsupportive and this kind of thing. And if you have people in your life who are not supportive of what you're doing right now, in most cases, it's not because they wish any harm on you or anything like that. It's because they don't want to see you struggle. And as an entrepreneur, you're going to struggle, like not just talking about financially, but it's like the time that it takes. My social life, I've had no social life the past year, and I'm okay
Yeah.
with that. But it's like you have to make a lot of sacrifices to make your dreams come true. And a
Mhm.
lot of people are just never going to understand that. And that's one of those things that if you're an entrepreneur, you're going to get it. And if you don't, if you're not going to get it. And people aren't really going to see it until you truly make it to the other side. So I feel like understanding that is a really big part of it.
Absolutely, and I love that. I think that's such a wise conversation piece, and one thing that I've also gathered in conversations with people. Not only do they not want to see you struggle, but I think sometimes we go to people that we like, love, we trust, we respect, for advice about things that they don't know about. And they're going to give you, I mean, the best knowledge they can, right? But to your point, it's usually out of a place of protection, not a place of knowledge. And I think that can be really difficult sometimes when you go, a prime example, right, is typically your parents, and you say, oh, I went to my mom and dad about this topic, and you go, well, they gave you the best advice they could, but really, your dad's a banker and you want to go into photography. I don't know that there's a whole lot of knowledge that can be passed on, from that touch point to this touch point. So talk a little bit about that for you and just in your journey.
Yeah, that's actually a very relevant topic right now. I grew up in a wonderful family. I have phenomenal parents, siblings. They've always been wonderful. But to your point, they're they're just not going to understand it until I get to where I need to be. And when I first started, they were kind of sending me job listings and, oh, hey, you could get back into real estate, or, oh, well, why don't you go work for this company, you could be a marketing director here. And that was their way of being supportive, and I didn't get it at the time. There had been quite a few arguments about that, like, why don't you see what I'm trying to do? And it's
Yeah.
also a new world where, my dad, he was the postmaster and he's the mayor of our town. My mom was an elementary musical school teacher. And so the idea of helping athletes with their social media and personal brand and partnerships was just like, what? That's a career? And I'm like, well, it kind of seems made up, but yes, it is. So it's kind of like a sign of the times too, where it's like they were never, they love me so much. They're always going to be there for me. And it's never anything, ill willed or anything like that. But sometimes people just aren't going to understand it. And so whether it's family or friends, I have definitely, my circle used to be very large and it's gone down a lot intentionally because there's been certain people where, if I'm around somebody and they like to gossip or they're negative, then I feel like I'm starting to get pulled into that, which I don't like that about myself, obviously. And so I'm like, I have to pull myself away from you. But then there's friends, like my friend Christine in Indianapolis, one of my best friends. I'll go to her and her husband's house, and they're both entrepreneurs, and they're just, sky's the limit, big dreams. And we could talk for hours, and we get so fired up. And that's one big reason why, I'm in New York right now, because when you're around that, you just become that, right? Like if I'm in the Midwest, if I'm in Indianapolis all the time or Cincinnati, smaller cities like that, I'm just gonna get so content with being where I am. But like when you're around the energy like you are in bigger cities or people who are doing the same thing that you're doing, it's gonna make you like level up. It's like you can't be in those circles that are discontent anymore if you're serious about whatever you're trying to build.
Boom. That's a mic drop. Well, Kara, I want to say thanks so much for hopping on and sharing your journey, and excited to just continue to watch you grow and build this thing. And 3 years from now, we'll be doing this conversation again, highlighting all the different athletes you're working with and the events you've been able to do. But yeah, thanks again for hopping on.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. It's one thing that's important to me is like you again just kind of sharing your story where I feel like especially like through COVID when everyone's kind of getting online and everything and not doing things in person, people are just craving that connectivity and like, hey, the me too, so whether it's, learning more about an Enneagram or about someone's story through this, if one little thing that you learn today can kind of, inspire you or take away and hey, if she can do it, then I can do it, then it's worth it. So I'm like, whether you're an athlete or an entrepreneur or just plain old, Mary Jane, there's always something about your story that can relate to somebody else. I just encourage all you guys, whether it's social media or in person conversations, just share your story a little more.